This is going to be a pretty quick one for you, and it is just a reminder that recovery is not about motivation, it is about commitment. You don't have to want to do every recovery action in the moment. In fact, it's pretty common to not want to do it. You very often will not feel motivated in the face of fear. But commitment is different. It is a lot stronger than motivation. It is something that we can come back to in those moments of fear. And it's something that we can do regardless of our emotional state. That is the point of a commitment. It is not something that you do when you want to or because you're motivated to. It's because you have committed to, regardless of your emotional state or maybe what else is going on in your life at that moment. In order to recover, fully recover from your ED, you are going to have to take committed, recovery-aligned actions in the face of fear, even when you do not feel motivated. Once I made recovery commitments, not motivations, commitments, it really just simplified everything. I am not saying it was easy. There were still a lot of moments of doubt, but because I had made recovery commitments and I truly believed that they were in alignment with what I wanted to get out of recovery, what I wanted to get out of my life, it made it simpler to follow through with those actions because I had committed. I no longer had to rely on motivation or how much I wanted recovery in the moment. I had commitments that I could come back to remind myself of why I was taking this action in the moment, when a lot of me, most of my body and brain was screaming at me to not take that action. I was able to come back to these recovery commitments and hold myself accountable. I had 3 recovery commitments that formed the pillars of my recovery. They were, number 1, that I would respond fully and completely to any hunger, whether that was mental or physical. So that was very different to just having something to maybe tide me over. That was fully responding to all of that hunger in the moment. This didn't mean that I didn't follow my regular meal plan or structure. I still did that, but I also was able to honor any hunger over and above. That was my commitment to my recovery. Number 2 was that I would always do the opposite action of what my ED suggested. I think this for me got a little bit complicated, and that was my ED getting in the way. And I think it's really crucial to say that sometimes what your core self wants aligns with an opposite action for your eating disorder. Other times, the opposite action might not actually be necessarily what your core self wants. Maybe you don't like that particular food, but your ED really doesn't like that food. In that situation, the opposite action is still to eat whatever that food is in that moment because it's the opposite of what your ED wants. So I just thought that was important to say that my commitment to doing the opposite action of my eating disorder suggestions was even in those moments that I wasn't sure whether it fully aligned with my core self's desires. And finally, number 3 was that I committed to eating an abundant intake way over and above what my ED deemed necessary even for recovery. And that was to be done regardless of my hunger cues. And that was a very important one for me because I think that fear can get in the way of hunger cues, that you can talk yourself out very easily of the abundant intake, what you really know you need, but you get overwhelmed in that moment by fear or by something else that means that you don't have a sufficiently adequate, abundant intake that is going way above what your ED deems necessary, because that is what we need to do time and time again in recovery in order to reach that place of full freedom. So these 3 commitments became the bedrock of my recovery. They became the thing that I could come back to, and they are so much more concrete than mere intention or relying on that motivation to recover. And these are just my commitments. Yours can look different. I personally like the fact that there were only 3 of them. They pretty much encapsulated everything that I wanted to achieve with my recovery. And as I say, it just really simplified it. I had lots of other more specific, targeted, rule-based commitments that I had to make along the way, but these 3 just formed that sort of baseline of commitments that I knew would get me to a place of recovery. So that's it. That's the message for today. Stop relying on motivation. Start committing to recovery action. You know the actions that you need to take. The challenge is committing to it and taking those actions time and time again. But I know that you know what those recovery commitments need to be.